How's it going, everyone? Thanks for tuning into this episode of Phil Talks Sports. Today is September 17th, 2019. And before we get into today's interview, I just want to thank everyone that listened to the last episode a few weeks ago about Doug Flutie's Maximum Football 2019, the video game that releases in about 10 days as of the time of this recording. I had an interview with Eric, the dev team member of that game, and it got over 100 views, listens, depending on the platform, and that's the first time in a while I've had an episode crack triple digits, so thank you everyone who made that possible. I really appreciate it. Hopefully I can get around the same amount on this one, because I have a pretty interesting show for you guys today. So I'm someone who watches both the NFL and college football pretty regularly, and almost the same amount, I'd say, regardless of if my team or school was playing or not. And obviously one of the biggest differences from college football to professional football is the emphasis on marching bands. Almost every major school has one. Some are more notable than others. And this is an episode I've been meaning to make for a while because I've had a friend for a very long time, since middle school, who I actually met in band. I was someone who played sports growing up, and I got to middle and high school. I was just flat out a better musician than I was an athlete. And music and drums in particular kind of runs in my family, which we get into later. So I decided to stick with that. I did that all through high school, and then I picked sports back up again when I started college, playing flag football and things like that. So the person I'm interviewing today, his name is Richard Thayer. As I was saying, we were on the same drum line in middle school and high school. We overlapped. He's a few years older than I am. And he actually went on to Florida State to play on the Big 8 Drumline, which is what I would assume is one of the more notable marching bands and drum lines in college football, obviously playing one of the most iconic songs in college football, the War Chant. So in today's episode, I interview him, and he gives his experience, what it's like to be on a drum line at a Division I program, what it's like to travel to other schools, and how that even gets determined. And since we are both members of drum lines through the past, we've always gotten the question about how similar the movie Drumline starring Nick Cannon is to actually being on a drum line in high school or college or whatnot. So we're going to go on to the interview now. This is Richard Thayer, former Mr. New Smyrna Beach for his ability to play the drums, former Big 8 Drumline member at Florida State University. Enjoy. All right, joining me now, my guest at this time, a FSU alumni, a huge Redskins fan, and I'm not just saying this because he's here, the greatest drummer I've ever seen live. He's known around here as King Thayer, Richard Thayer. Thanks for joining me, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So you've basically been a drummer. We met being on the middle school drum line in New Smyrna.
Yeah, I think I was 8th grade and you were just coming in 6th.
Right. So that's when I met you, and I kind of started playing the drums in 5th grade because they did that thing after school where you could go to the middle school and start learning. Yeah. So I started in 5th grade. I assume you started way before that even.
Yeah, actually, I basically started playing when I was old enough to just pick up a pair of sticks or spoons or something, and that was my first thing, was pots and pans with wooden spoons. So it's there I am, 1 year old, just doing that. And,
which sounds cliche, but people really do that.
That's a real thing. It's not just it is cliche, but it actually does happen. My mom has memories of cooking in the kitchen, and I have a few pots and pans, and I'm just ping, ping, boom, boom.
So, and then with my story, my grandpa, my father, and now me also, I've all played the drums. So, the drums in particular, percussion ran in my family. You have a music background in your family too, correct?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. Both sides of my family, going up to the grandfathers on both sides, I should just say grandparents on both sides, because all of them played. Mm-hmm. My grandfather on my mom's side, and his wife, my grandmother, both played piano. He had a really good ear for being able to pick out tunes and stuff, so he played a lot. My grandmother learned how to read and play piano. My mom had a really good ear. She could play piano, saxophone, guitar. I mean, she really had a lot of musical talent. She was able to play a lot of different instruments. And then came to me. And then, of course, my dad played music. He actually was on scholarship with VCU.
Oh, okay.
For trombone performance. And he also took drum lessons while he was in college. So I'm thinking that's probably where I got that part of it from.
Right.
And it translated there. And then, on my dad's side, his father, principal French horn player for the National Symphony Orchestra for years. His mom, was actually on the drum line in high school.
Okay.
And one of my dad's oldest brother, Bruce, he also played drumline in high school. And then everybody in that family, they've played something. My Uncle Will plays trumpet. My Aunt Laura plays saxophone, and I got all of it.
So, whereas the difference for like my family, it was drums. That's where it began and ended. Your family, obviously, much more well-rounded, and you yourself play. Like drums is obviously what you're known for around here,
Mm-hmm.
and what you'd probably obviously consider your best instrument. But you play other things. Why do you think? I've seen you play trumpet. I've seen you play other things. Why do you think drums and percussion is where it like stuck? Because you were clearly talented enough to play really any instrument you set your mind to. Because it's in your blood. It's in your genes. But drums is obviously where it stuck. Why do you think that is?
I think drums stuck mainly because that's what just clicked so much for me. That's what I have a lot of my early musical experiences doing. Just kind of like when I was young, my dad would sit me down on his lap behind the kit and just let me play while he was doing the foot pedal stuff with the bass drum and the hi-hat. And I think it just stuck.
Mm.
You know, it's like I could have gone any different direction. And I remember actually before we did in middle school, before we did like the choose your instrument day. This was actually in middle school when we were doing like beginning band, and it's like, okay, well, what are we going to play? The night before, I was like, I really don't know what I'm going to go with, because I could change a lot of directions here. I was like, man, I just remember pacing around thinking, do I want to go with trumpet? I don't know. Do I want to go with saxophone? Maybe.
I remember going to that, meet the band kind of thing, and it almost felt like a job fair. Like, all the little sections were set up, and they're like, hey, come over here.
Yeah.
Check this out. So, like, you really could have been pulled in any direction.
Yeah. I mean, we did all of that stuff. We went through every section. Everybody got a chance to play each, different instrument. A brass, trumpet for brass, saxophone, or I think clarinet for woodwind, and then, snare drum for percussion. And
right.
it was like, I could choose any of these, but I'm going to stick with the drums.
Yeah, makes sense. So, fast forward a little bit, went through middle school. In high school, I believe you were on the all-county band at some point.
Yeah, sophomore year through senior year in high school, I was with all-county percussion.
And then winning the Mr. New Smyrna thing, was that after high school with band? Or by playing the drums?
Mr. NSB was junior year.
Okay, so it's gotten you a lot of accolades through that time. And then afterwards, you went on to Florida State University, which you've been a fan of since I've known you. Was it ever, obviously you wanted to go to FSU. I think some people have a misconception of like, if you go to a college and you want to be in band, there's just like, you just kind of sign up. People don't realize that there's tryouts and stuff. How's that process? Like, let's say I'm a talented all-county caliber, anything really, and I get accepted to a big four-year university, because I think with Daytona State or like a junior college, it's not as big of a thing. They probably do accept just about everybody. Yeah. So let's say you go to a four-year university. What's the process like to get into the band there?
They do have a number of bands with the College of Music, because they are very diverse in what they do. They have percussion ensembles, brass, wind, orchestra, and some of their groups are more casual, where it's just like, show up if you can play, you're in kind of deal. And I did a couple of those while I was there. Marching Chiefs is one of the bands where there's an audition process.
To me, that seems like the varsity level of it, you could almost say.
Basically any of their more serious ensembles that they put a lot of time and work into, you have to pass an audition, kind of like doing all county. Mm-hmm. Like, you have to audition and you have to pass that. You have to pass that test. Mm-hmm. So they have, if you're a more casual player, like you just enjoyed playing in high school, you can do one of the more casual bands. If you really wanted to be cream of the crop, you had to do the audition process, and you would get cut. There was no hand-holding. It's like, you either got it, or it's like, sorry, keep practicing, do better, but not now. And
you could always, I know some people have like, just because they didn't make it didn't mean they didn't try the next year, and sometimes they did make it. It was quick. It was definitely a year-to-year basis.
Yeah, it's year-to-year basis. Everybody in Marching Chiefs has to re-audition every single year. Mm-hmm. It's marching and it's playing. I mean, they have to do the whole process over again. I mean, obviously, once you've done it once and you want to keep doing it, you're probably going to be able to, because
unless you just nosedive for some reason.
Unless you just nosedive, or sometimes you wind up not being able to do it again.
Mm-hmm. So with you, so you were there for 4 years, and you were on the Marching Chiefs for how long?
I was actually, unfortunately, only able to do Marching Chiefs for 1 year because class scheduling for the rest of the 3 years just turned out to be a nightmare and overlapped with our daily rehearsals for Marching Chiefs.
So what year were you active? Like, if you paralleled it to the football season, what football season were you part of the Marching Chiefs?
2008 football season.
Okay, so that would be...
That was not a great year. That
not
was
a great year.
6-6 year.
So is that like Christian Ponder era?
Yeah, that's Christian Ponder.
Okay, great. So in that 1 year, obviously not the best year, and unfortunately now it's not also the worst year that Florida State's had recently.
Yeah.
But what are some of the memories you have, either traveling to an away game or whatnot? Like, what are the highlights? Give me like 3 to 4 to 5 of the highlights of that year.
I would say one of the bigger highlights of the year, this is like a mid-season one, it just sticks out because we went to Miami. That was an away game at Miami that year, and we took 13, I think, buses, because what we put on the field is all of our drill that we do is designed for 450.
Okay.
Or maybe sometimes less, maybe about 410, 415 members of the band. And even with, 420 of us out there, we still have backups. There's still like 30 to 40 backups that double at certain positions on the field.
So do they, with the backups, let's say, do they play in the stands still?
They still play in the stands.
Okay.
So when you see the Marching Chiefs in the stands,
it's bigger than what's on the field.
Yeah, it's just it's bigger than what's on the field by about 30 to 40 people, just because writing drill for almost 500 people at that point would just be asinine.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You couldn't do much.
Right.
But it was really cool going to that game. And unfortunately for Miami's band, that was just a year or two after they had been allowed to come back. They got disbanded for some disciplinary reasons.
And such, yeah.
Yeah. So they only had probably 40 people in their band.
Mm-hmm.
Nevertheless, they still got out there and did their whole sequence, and, props to them for doing that.
Sure.
But that game was a really close game. It was rainy all night, too. Mm-hmm. So we were they put us up in the nosebleeds because, it's Miami.
Sure.
And it didn't matter because they didn't have a lot of people show up, so our sound just echoed through the whole stadium.
Sure, yeah, that's a problem even now for them.
Yeah, and what I remember is that game just being really back and forth. There wasn't a lot of passing going on because the rain was coming and going, and the field was just wet. Mm-hmm. And literally, defenders were slipping off, the guys they were supposed to tackle, and it was just a hard-fought game back and forth. And but the reason it sticks out in my mind is because at the end of the game, we had scored, I think, the go-ahead touchdown with a minute or so left, and our defense held them off to win that game by a score. And right as the game ended, the sky just opened up, and it poured. It was raining so heavily that when we marched back out of the stadium to the buses, the water was past our ankles.
Oh, wow.
So everybody's in their marching gear and just
sloshing along.
Just sloshing along. I mean, the drums were soaked, everybody's pants were soaked, the socks, shoes. It was done. Mm-hmm. And it was just like, we got onto the buses and everybody was just miserable because everything is soaked from the rain and trudging through everything. But it was a fun game to go to just because of the environment and just, it's like, holy crap, I guess we're just going to march through a foot of water.
Mm-hmm. So you talk about going to away games, and this is just something that I can tie into what happened this year. UCF just played FAMU, crummy football team, but one of the more noteworthy college bands in the country, and they didn't travel to this game, even though it was, for their standards, a quick drive, 4 or 5 hour drive for them, because they wanted UCF to pay for them to be there, where our argument was, this is a nationally televised game, you think you would want to be here. What is the process for, obviously, Florida State at home, you'll never not see the band there. Yeah. What's the process? Obviously, Miami, I could see, again, a relatively closer travel. What is the farthest in the year you went that you guys traveled, and what's the process like deciding if the band goes to an away game or not?
For an organization as large as the Marching Chiefs, there's a lot that goes into it. Obviously, moving 450 people, we need a lot of buses. I think I mentioned we took about 13 to Miami.
Right.
So in those instances, the university looks at the travel costs, looks how far everything's going, and it's not like getting 1 or 2 buses for the football team. That's something that's
a given.
That's a given.
Yeah.
With when you got to move an organization several times larger than your football team to go, the university has to say, okay, well, do we have the money for it? And a lot of times, one of the biggest deciding factors is how big is this game, sure. And, is it worth the cost? Mm-hmm. So if FSU plays Boston College up at Boston College, it's not necessarily considered a huge game because, no offense to Boston College, they're not usually like one of the teams to beat, even though they're regularly just, they're a pretty good team sure. year in, year out. Mm-hmm. But Florida State isn't going to sit there and be like, oh, we really need the band to be up there for that game. Mm-hmm. Because it's, multiple thousands, it's tens of thousands of dollars to do that, not to mention the hotel stay for the band, yep. per diem for the band, which can get into the hundreds of thousands of dollars. I'm sure. Even for just a weekend. Mm-hmm. So that's a lot of what determines that. But if we go to Clemson, mm-hmm. or we go to Florida, any of our big rivals, Miami.
They're there.
They're there. Mm-hmm. I mean, at the FSU administration's like, boom, let's go. And a lot of it's actually negotiated through the band director, too. Okay. The band director sits down with the administration and says...
I'm sure it's planned out before the year almost. Like, okay, obviously all the home games, that's a given, and then maybe 1 or 2 or 3, depending on the schedule of the away games. That would make sense to me. So, like, that particular year, was Clemson away? Was Florida away? How did that work? You said, obviously, you went to Miami.
Florida was a home game that year, so we didn't have to go anywhere for that.
Right.
I think Clemson was an away game in 2008. Mm-hmm. But at that time in 2008, Clemson wasn't really anybody either. But which is crazy to think how things have changed in the past 10 years. Either that or they were a home game and we didn't have to go anywhere, which I think that actually was the case because I remember watching the Clemson game from the stands. So they were home that year, so we didn't have to worry about that. Okay. But the biggest notable one I could think of was Miami. We had a home heavy schedule that year, so we didn't really travel because we had a game against like BYU, mm-hmm. crushed them. I was at that game. Yeah? Yeah. That was the one game I've been to at Florida State, home live. Okay, so I guess I should have backtracked a little bit. The year you were there, were you snare? Were you tenors? What did you play the one year? The one year I was doing it, I was tenors. Okay. So that, to me, just from, my high school knowledge of the thing, there's some form of hierarchy of, you play bass, then you play snare, then you play tenor. I feel like it's so complex on the college level. That's not really the case. It's just what you're maybe best at. Yeah. If somebody's on bass, they don't consider it lower than being on snare, really, on that level, I don't think. No, absolutely not. When you go to somewhere like FSU or Michigan State or Michigan, people that are renowned for having good band programs and drum lines in general, being on any part of the line is an honor. Mm-hmm. Because of just the high level of play that's expected out of you. I mean, you have to be able to read music very well, pick it up, learn it, and we learn a new show every single week. So doing that, it takes a lot out of you. Just to put it in comparison for people that don't know, if you go to your high school game and your high school band's on the field, and me and you've been through this, you learn a show throughout the entire football season, the entire semester, whatever you want to call it. And, yeah, if you're someone that goes to every one of your high school games, you will see the show get progressively better throughout the year, and by the time the football season's ending, FBA or whatever you call it in your state, that show is pretty finely tuned. You guys do that every week. Yeah. When you first got into that, obviously you knew what to expect, you knew that was the case, but that's got to be a little bit of a shock of, not only do you have to learn this new thing, but you almost, they talk about, a quarterback's got to have quick memory. You do too. You got to, forget everything. You take everything you just learned and forget it, because now we got new. What is that process like? It can be very interesting at times because with Big 8, we actually got to rehearsals a half hour early, and we did warm-ups while everybody else is walking out on the field and getting their instruments, we're just out there warming up, running through show stuff for the week. Mm-hmm. So, it was 2.5 hours every day of the week from 2:30 to 5. Okay. Every single day. That's what it takes to get the Marching Chiefs. And is that considered a class, or is that in your schedule? Marching Chiefs actually does get put on the schedule as a class, so you do get credit for it. Mm-hmm. But yeah, just having to do that every single day and just the amount of practice you have to do to put on a different show every week is it's quite a challenge. There's, you just have to be ready for that stuff, and it requires some practice outside of rehearsals too. Oh, sure, yeah. Just getting used to the music and everything. So when we come together and practice, that's everybody putting everything together and also learning and improving every single day, because it's just kind of like an entire year's worth of high school practice that gets shoved into about 10 hours during the week.
Right.
Now, obviously, we can't do a lot of show complexity because of that.
I can see that, yeah.
But generally, if you're at the college level and you're still doing it, you can learn the music part of it pretty easily. But because of that, you don't have any requirements about using, keeping the music with you.
Right.
Using the lyres and flip folders so you can keep track of the music. You almost have to use that.
I would think so. Yeah, because in high school, after a couple of games, it's like you hit a point where, all right, we're 4 games into the season, no more of the lyres, and you can't have those. It's like taboo at that point. But I can see that's more relaxed on the college level because of the quick turnaround.
Yeah, because we were learning 3 pieces, sometimes upwards of 4 pieces per week, for any given game for the halftime show, and it's still like an 8-9 minute halftime show, and we're doing formations and everything like that. So it's just asking the students to memorize that on top of drill, on top of going to class and everything else, that's just too much to expect. So they're like, no, use the music, but you still have to learn it.
So obviously, another thing, pulling from my high school band experience, you got your show music and then you got your stands music. Is that stay relatively the same through the year?
The stands music stays the same. That's stuff that's actually worked out during the preseason training camp for the marching chiefs.
Oh, okay.
So
so you have that down going in already.
Yeah, there's a band camp, which serves as the audition process. But once you get officially named part of the group, a lot of band camp is spent learning the stands tunes. War chants and uprising, anything else that we would do that you hear the...
Or even just your pop culture music that people would know. So,
any of those songs, yeah.
Gotcha. So is there ever a situation, because the stands music, or the show music, gets siphoned through so quickly, does any of that ever make it to the stands? Like a song, that got played on a halftime show gets put in the rotation?
Yeah, actually we had that happen that year. Sometimes we'll take sections of shows and use them as stands tunes for 30 to 45 seconds in between plays. So that's something that happens too. And another thing is, if we don't have a particularly big game, like say it's just, it's Shark Week and we're playing, Division II nobody, we'll recycle old shows and actually use those, because by the end of the season, come late October and November, everybody's kind of getting worn down. So
let's say when you play, Samford, which tends to be a thing right now, obviously because of the ties to Jimbo at the time, you would maybe just play the show from last week or pick one from earlier in the year?
Usually a few weeks prior.
Just so it's fresh.
So it's a little fresher and it's not recent for any of the fans that are coming back. They may not remember it, but even if they do, they're like, oh, well, it's been a while since we heard it. More recently, a great example of that is a couple of years back. I think it was in 2016 or 2017 when we did Thriller.
Okay.
Thriller was such a highly rated show. The audience loved it every single time that it was just something that got brought back continuously. And I was at one of the games that season, and after the game, there was so much request for that show to be performed again. The Chiefs got out there, and after having gone through the entire game and performing halftime show, they performed the entire Thriller show on the field after it. So sometimes you get really popular stuff like that, and they'll bring it back.
Okay. So this is the question I don't want to ask, but I feel obligated to ask because I've got it 100 times, and I know you've gotten it 1,000 times. Then the movie Drumline, how accurate is it? If you could a rough percentage.
If I had to give a rough percentage on how accurate Drumline is, having been through the college audition experience,
I feel like that'd be the only part that's kind of right.
That's kind of right. Everything else you see in Drumline, as far as how they approach what it looks like, is just sort of Hollywood doing their thing and sprucing up what they believe the experience to be. But let's be honest, if you tried to make a movie out of what Bandcamp really is, it's not all that exciting unless you're into it, unless you're into that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So I can say they definitely add a lot of pomp and circumstance to the whole scenario. But Nick Cannon's main character in that, if he had that kind of attitude in just about any college program, there would be, kind of like you saw in the movie, there were significant repercussions for that. So that part was on point.
Yeah.
But as far as being able to play whatever you want in an audition and him getting it anyway, that would be something that's not really looked at.
Yeah.
That's just kind of like, when I sat down to do my audition, the percussion instructor for it was there, the graduate assistants and some of the people from the percussion studio were there, so you're getting judged by like 4 or 5 people.
So the setup was accurate then.
The setup was accurate.
Right.
Like, when they're doing the auditions and stuff, yes, you're getting judged. Yeah. You're getting critiqued by several different people.
Because as I watched, it's been forever since I've seen it, but that's the one thing I'm like, this is probably roughly how this goes.
Now, they had it outdoors, and they had their line members up there, doing the whole horn thing for what they think that person should be.
Yeah.
That was just something they added to that. There's not really any input from the upperclassmen. It's all about what the percussion instructor sees and what the judges in the evaluation see.
Is there really the P1, P2 system, that whole thing? That seems out there a little to me too.
Kind of.
Okay.
It's kind of like that. If we had just way too many people, we would use an alternates list. It would be, you'd have your number one guy and then maybe an alternate, but...
but that's not the be-all, end-all.
That's not the be-all, end-all. That was kind of something that seems to have been added just for...
I mean, I could see it making someone just watching a movie easy to understand.
Yeah.
Going through the ranks, you know.
That was basically what it was done for. Plus, it set up for a little bit of drama later in the movie with people moving around.
Yeah. And obviously, I think that's loosely based off of FAMU and BCU because they have the classic at the end.
Right. That's the thing. North Carolina A&T is in the Showstyle band category.
Yes.
So there's really 2 kind of major categories. There's Showstyle like BCU, FAMU, North Carolina A&T.
Mm-hmm. The whole SWAC conference, really.
Yeah. And then you have traditional marching bands, which is the more military parade style, which is what FSU, Clemson, and everybody else like
and
that.
And even at the time that we were in high school, our director had more of that style.
Ours,
time,
a lot of high school bands are traditional military precision drill kind of stuff.
I feel like that's changing. Like, as someone who works with the high school football team in our area, like, I do feel like obviously Mainland has always been show style because they're literally across the street from the greatest show style band in the country. Mm-hmm. But even our school, I feel New Smyrna, I feel like has laxed on that. Like, not that it's a bad thing at all, but I've seen a shift in that level. I mean, I don't know how often you see high school level things now, but I feel like there's some, at least in our area, there's been a shift for that.
Yeah, it's definitely like they were talking about actually in the movie Drumline. They're not kidding when they're talking about the switch between military and show style bands. The count off is different. Show style bands actually don't mark off on the left foot like military does. They start off on the right.
Okay.
And there is a lot of changes with the body movements because it's not so much, the rigidity that you see in military bands. It's more you're putting on a show, so it's more physically demanding to be in a show style band because of how you're performing everything. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people will say it's like with the military bands, there's a lot more control for the sound of the music. And on the one hand, that's true. But in a show style band, you're all about the flair and the energy and everything. And BCU does a very good job with their quality of music and still being probably the best show style band in the country. I mean, having seen them live myself, I can definitely say that they're tops.
Yeah, and then I think there's some D1 schools that maybe find a line that they like and walk it. Like an example I would say is like Penn State, when they're on the field, it seems military style, but their drum major still does all the flips and the dances and everything. So they've found a half and half that works for them. I think there's some schools that it's hard to have your cake and eat it too, but I think some of the better schools can pull it off quite nicely.
Yeah, FSU's kind of taken that approach lately with getting more involved with some of the more popular music that's been played, especially by the SWAC bands and stuff like that. We had, when we played BCU, they have a song they call Neck. Mm-hmm. And we played it, and they actually played it, but they actually were giving FSU's band props for they said that we were probably the best traditional style band that has played that song.
Nice. That's quite a tip of the cap then if they're saying that. So for... Again, comparing the halftime band, which you've seen in the stadium, is almost like the varsity level. That makes me think of guys like
people stay in touch after college because they played on the same team. Do you keep any relationships with people you were either on the drumline or the band itself with?
Yes and no, because, as you go on in life and follow your own path, you kind of just, lose touch with people. But at the same time, we'll have Big 8 reunions. And everybody just,
okay. How often is that? Every 5 years? Every couple years?
Sometimes, it's before a big game or something like that.
Okay, they just invite alumni back kind of thing?
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, they have, I think it's Spirit Night, which is where a lot of the alumni will come back to, or they'll do the alumni band too for one of the games. So a lot of times that's when Big 8 will get together, and everybody will meet up and be like, "Oh, hey, how you're doing?" Stuff like that. Unfortunately, I can't really make it to any of those. Just living 4.5 hours away is just kind of a deterrent on that. But it'd be pretty cool to do that one day. But that's something that does happen every once in a while.
Okay, that's good. At least they make the effort to keep people involved. So as we go to wrap up here, I mentioned in the intro, obviously Florida State, a big part of your life. You've also been a Redskins fan for a long time. Did that come from the similarities of Florida State, or did it come from it's one of the only NFL teams that has a marching band also?
At the time, I didn't, when I became a Redskins fan, I didn't know that they had, they were one of the only ones with a marching band. But, since my dad's been a fan for so long, my family, his side of the family's from Virginia, Northern Virginia, so they've been, Redskins fans for a while. So I just kind of grew up with that, and then I found out they had a marching band, and I was like, oh, that's pretty awesome. So it was kind of ironic that, my NFL team and my college team have literally almost the same colors.
Yeah, I was say your color wheel for a while there is very one-dimensional.
Yeah, Redskins just adding that shade darker burgundy.
Yeah.
So that was just kind of cool. I didn't really have to change colors between Saturday and Sunday. I could wear either shirt and nobody would know the difference.
That's true. So usually when I have someone on for the first time, I do kind of like a speed round of favorite players from their team. So if you had to give your top 3 favorite Redskins, who would they be?
Oh, top 3 favorite Redskins? Let's see. Definitely Clinton Portis.
Okay.
Yeah, I know he was a Cane. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that he was a Cane. He was still one of the best running backs of all time, really, I think. Sometimes I think he's even a little underrated for what he was able to do.
Right.
Then you've got, I believe it was Sean Taylor. Probably one of the best safeties to play the game. And
ironically, also a Cane.
Yeah, also, look, Miami was just that good back then, and their players became my players, so,
that worked out.
It worked out pretty well. And then I could throw another guy in there. Chris Thompson is actually on the Redskins right now.
Right.
I want to see him used more, but I guess they just not.
He's a guy that, obviously, I'm an Eagles fan. I don't watch a whole lot of Redskins games, but that was a guy who had to get the 5th-year medical red shirt. He was littered with injuries, and if you would have told me out of all the running backs in the past couple of years, obviously Dalvin Cook's doing great things. For him to have, he's got to be in his 3rd or 4th year in the league. For him to have the average career for an NFL player is 3 years. So for him to be past that with his early injury history, I think it's pretty incredible that he's lasted. Even if, let's say, it's his last year, I don't see any reason for that to be the case because he's definitely a change of pace and a spark plug for that offense. But he's one of the unknown, bright, comeback stories of the league that I don't think a lot of people know about.
Yeah. Chris Thompson actually at FSU, I think it was the 2011 or 2010 Wake Forest game. It was a 2010 Wake Forest game. He actually got severely injured. He was on one of his plays when the defender made the tackle. He actually broke his back.
Right. Yeah. He's
one of his vertebrae just snapped, and he was out for a year. That's why he got that medical red shirt. The very next year, I think it was 2011. Somebody's probably going to correct me on this if I'm wrong.
Right.
But he came back with a vengeance and rushed for 199 yards and 2 touchdowns. I think it was 2 touchdowns against Wake Forest. But at that point in the game, Jimbo pulled him and it's like, okay, that's enough. We don't want to wear you out.
Up, yeah.
But yeah, he's been through a lot, and I imagine had he not had the injury history that he's had, he'd have done more in the NFL, and not like he hasn't done a lot.
I was to say, he's done very great for himself.
Yeah, he's done respectably. He's lasted a long time. It's just I feel like he could have been like another Dalvin Cook or Devontae Freeman had he just not been injured so often.
So same question for your Seminoles if you had to give a top 3.
Oh man, you got to do top 3 Seminoles. I'm going to start out with Jameis Winston first of all because I got to watch that happen.
Right.
That's a once in a decade kind of player. Like he's almost basically a franchise player because of how good he was.
I mean, he basically lost 1 game in 2 years, so I could definitely see where that would come from.
29-1, I think it is.
Yeah.
So there's not many players ever that get to say that they're that good.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe the closest person now is Jalen Hurts at 27-2.
Yeah.
And then Dalvin Cook.
Mm-hmm.
Dalvin Cook's got to be probably my favorite Noles player, actually above Jameis Winston, just because, I don't know, I've always had a thing for really talented running backs.
Right.
To me, it's kind of like you're doing all the legwork there. Like, as a receiver or quarterback, you have to be in sync, and that play has to happen. The 2 players have to be, just really good on that.
Right.
But if you're the receiver, you get the credit for all 40 yards that the quarterback threw it, even if you just catch it and go down.
Yeah.
Running back, if you go 40 yards, that's all you, and of course your lineman setting up good blocks.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But I don't know. I think that's why I've just had just kind of a soft spot for running backs, or maybe he was watching Clinton Portis play.
Makes
and
sense.
Just watching him just be a beast at the game. And then I'm going to go with one of the late greats, Deion Sanders.
Yeah, you can't not pick him.
Yeah. The guy revolutionized and became the face of Florida State football in their decade of dominance for their dynasty. It's just, everybody says that he was the player that started that whole dominance when Florida State went to Michigan in the 92 season, I think it was. And the first play from scrimmage was a pick 6 by none other than Deion, and that was the beginning of that decade of dominance.
I think we could do a whole episode just on Deion. So one last question before we get out of here. If I'm let's say a freshman in high school and I'm a musician, someone who has kind of gone through every rank imaginable, made somewhat of a professional career out of his, musical skills, what's one piece of advice you'd give to an inspiring musician? Let's say drummer, just so it ties into you better.
If you're going to be a drummer and you want to look to do this professionally, you're going to have to really focus and hone your skills and abilities to do it. It's not something like we're in high school. If you're in the band, you can show up and you can put in effort, but to really make a career out of it, you've really got to put your heart and soul into it. And something that a lot of people won't really tell you is that, or you might hear a lot, is that music doesn't make you money. It's an incredibly difficult field to get into, and they are not wrong. I mean, in the Daytona, Orlando area alone, there's about 4,000 musicians competing for the jobs that Universal Orlando and Disney have going.
Right.
So you're going to want to have a solid plan B. You're going to want to basically have a backup plan or have a career path that is going to make you money, and you're probably just going to have music on the side. And if it makes you money, great. If you can find a way to become a professional musician and have that support you, more power to you. And I highly encourage you to follow that path. But just don't give up on your dreams. If it's what you want to do, go for it.
So, to summarize, a more realistic goal is to look at music as a hobby that'll make you money, as opposed to the be-all, end-all career.
Yeah.
That sound right?
Yeah, that's pretty much exactly how I would describe it. And if you're lucky enough to have music be a career, more power to you.
That's great advice, Richard. Thanks again for coming by. We've been wanting to do, ever since I've started this show, you were one of the first. Like, I have the notebook with all the people. You're literally the first page.
Yeah,
and
I noticed
done
that.
People before and after you, and I've had to mix it around. But I'm glad you were finally in town and we had the time to do it. So maybe later in the year when the Seminoles, and we can talk some Seminole football and Redskins stuff later in the year. But thanks again for coming by, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Phil.
All right, so that was Richard Thayer. I want to thank him again for coming on the show, giving us his experiences, what it's like to be a band member and a drumline member at a Division I school like Florida State. So that's going to wrap up this episode. I kind of wanted this one to be standalone. Next episode, I'll get more into college football, what's going on in the NFL again. I just wanted this to kind of be standalone because this is an interview I've wanted to do for a while. Richard lives a couple hours away. He was actually in town, so we're like, all right, we got to do this. It's been, when I first started the show, as I mentioned in the interview, it's one of the first interviews that I had written down, had the questions ready. So it took about a year, but we finally got it done. So I kind of wanted this one to stand on its own. So thank you guys for listening, and I'll see you next time. Don't forget to give me a follow on Phil Talks Sports on Twitter, and have a good one.